Are philosophy and the Bible fundamentally at odds with each other? Are they fundamentally opposed to each other, or do they stand on a common ground? An ancestral tradition informs us that Moses was strenuously opposed to philosophy. He condemned philosophy as divination, this attempt to grasp knowledge, wisdom, Sophia, the desire, the quest, even the lustful quest for knowledge. What is this knowledge about? It is about grasping fruits, the forbidden fruit, contravening to divine authority, independently, autonomously of the dictates of the divine Father. Philosophy. Is philosophy the quest for knowledge? The etymology tells us, and yet Socrates comes onto the scene, and do we see him pursuing knowledge? Not quite. We see him questioning knowledge, questioning all claims to knowledge. Thereafter, certain interpreters have seen Socrates as a radical skeptic, a skeptic who assumed that either there is no truth, or that truth cannot be known, or at the very least, that truth is, well, relative to the beholder. And yet, something about Socratic skepticism defies these notions. It is fairly clear that Socrates questions knowledge, purported knowledge. Yet, Socrates claims to be pious. The questioning of knowledge, as opposed to the condemnation of knowledge, is seen as pious. Well, the seeing is a kind of knowledge, one might say. It is recognized as pious. What is it that allows Socrates to see his questioning as pious? As virtuous also, right? As righteous. What is the ground of Socrates' knowledge? You see, if Socrates recognizes himself as pious, that is to say that he has a kind of knowledge, and he assumes that he has this kind of knowledge. And yet, he questions human knowledge. What are we to make of this? Is Socrates to be condemned by the Bible? Is Socrates impious in Moses' eyes? What is key here is the distinction between knowledge and understanding. Now, we all readily concede that there is such a distinction, and yet, in the modern world, we're raised to cherish a peculiar sense of the relationship between knowledge and understanding that Socrates, well, probably did not share with us. We could say that we are raised to conceive knowledge as building up toward the understanding. In order to understand things, we need to accumulate a lot of knowledge. The more knowledge, the better. Then we'll be able to attain to understanding. One might say that there is a vulgar understanding of things. The streets are my school, many might say, which is to say that I don't need much knowledge to understand. And yet, what kind of understanding do we have there? What is the content of this understanding? Overall, our age is dominated by what we call science. We bow before its authority. Science is not handing us ready-made understanding, but it is empowering us to attain to an understanding. What about Socrates? Socrates is suggesting that the path to the understanding is one that is not progressive, it doesn't build on knowledge, but it is somehow regressive. The path to the understanding is a path of unpacking and unmasking. We do not reach understanding by acquiring knowledge, but by questioning knowledge. Back to the understanding. A kind of enlightenment that is not quite the modern one, although it may very well have been cherished in all pre-modern eras, most notably in the Middle Ages, as odd as this notion might strike us. Now, it might seem to us. Now, Socrates, is he compatible with the Bible? Well, if Socrates is not seeking knowledge, but understanding, an understanding that presupposes an unpacking of knowledge, not a buildup of knowledge, then philosophy, in the Socratic sense, is fundamentally compatible with the Bible. But how can we return to the understanding? Through the unpacking, through the negation of knowledge. This negation presupposes a ground that is somehow obscured by the sedimentation of knowledge. A luminous ground. It presupposes trust that there is a light beneath all of the pretenses to knowledge, all of the claims to knowledge, all of the certainties that we acquire in the course of our existence. Socratic investigations refer back to a god, the god who had somehow prompted Socrates to go around and question people's knowledge. Not only the knowledge of the farmer, not primarily in fact, but the knowledge of poets, of people who assume that they know, that they have attained to knowledge beyond the common sense of the people. The knowledge of sophists, the knowledge of pre-Socratics, the knowledge of philosophers of nature, the knowledge of, well, what we might call scientists. All of this is called into question, and this questioning refers somehow to a God who claims, through the oracle, that no man is wiser and thus more knowledgeable than Socrates. Socratic knowledge is not, we could say, scientific knowledge. It is not a knowledge that builds, but a knowledge that is rooted in the ground of knowledge. A knowledge that presupposes a conversion, a turn back to the ground of knowledge, whereby knowledge doesn't depend on building through our effort, but on an illumination of our effort to undo ourselves. The medieval tenet, fides querens intellectum, faith-seeking understanding, would then be compatible with Socratic philosophy, or with philosophy as understood and lived by Socrates. Socrates turns to question knowledge on the basis of a tacit, perhaps, turn to receive light from the ground of knowledge. This receptivity, which some have called phenomenological, this receptivity of Socrates to an understanding that arises out of the ground of all knowledge, and that provides knowledge with a solid grounding, we might say, right? A grounding that withstands skepticism. This turn and this receptivity of Socrates bespeaks faith, an openness, fides, a trust, faith as in fidelity, as honor. Socrates is faithful to the gods. He is reconnaissant. He is grateful. And this gratitude, the sense of gratitude of Socrates, he is not impious, right, is essential to the Socratic inquiry, or to the Socratic investigation. The Socratic skepticism is going around unpacking fake knowledge, purported but not well-grounded knowledge, knowledge that departs from common sense, from the ignorance of the people, the imagination of the people, unmediated by the purported knowledge of the scientists. So, in this fundamental sense, Socrates is a man of faith. He does not have faith in things seen. He has faith in things unseen, which is to say that he has good faith, not fake faith. He's not an idolatrous person. He turns, and this turn is implicit, tacit, necessarily so in his investigations. He turns in full openness to the ground of all knowledge. So much so that he doesn't even need to posit that ground. He does not have the authority, certainly, to do so. He does not live in Christian times where it is a done deal. That ground has been established formally. He lives in times where the sophist, the pre-Socratic, shall we say, claim to knowledge is perhaps under fire by the fathers, the patriarchy, and yet not on solid grounds. Not on biblical grounds. So Socrates is a man of faith, as early Christians and medievals, of course, would tell us. They were convinced that Socrates was somehow a prophet of Christianity. And in this sense, in this original sense, he was. For his faith was tacit or implicit in his undertakings. He was open to the divine for the sake of understanding. Now, this understanding is given by God, given by the ground of all knowledge. Now, this is not to say that the question of what God is not to be taken seriously by Socrates, or by Christians for that matter. Socratic philosophy, as all philosophy, is fundamentally really all about seeking understanding of the nature of God.